Hello and welcome to Talking Open for Climate Justice, a limited-run podcast series created by Western Michigan University Libraries. I'm your host, Sarah Volmering, and this week we're shining a light on open access and how it helps foster solutions for some of the greatest challenges facing our planet. So far in this series, we have learned about climate justice from a criminological and international development perspective. Today's guest, Dr. Denise Keele, will share her perspectives on the equity issues in the climate justice movement and how collaborating with others can help move this work forward. Dr. Keele received her doctorate in environmental politics from Syracuse University and was an associate professor of political science at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo. Her research and teaching focused on environmental policy and law, particularly in the use of the courts and interest groups to influence public policy. While at WMU, she chaired the Interdisciplinary Climate Change Working Group, bringing over 100 faculty, students, and staff together to create and implement several academic and outreach programs. She has served on numerous climate committees and initiatives in the Kalamazoo area, including the grassroots Kalamazoo Climate Crisis Coalition. Keele now serves as the director of the Michigan Climate Action Network. Dr. Keele, welcome to the podcast.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, Sarah.
My first question for you is, what does climate justice mean to you?
Yeah, it's a big term that lots of folks use now. So I'm so glad that you're starting with, what does this even mean? What is a definition of this? And the way that I think about this and the Michigan Climate Action Network defines this is that we believe we cannot solve the climate crisis without addressing systemic racism and oppression that continues to plague our culture, our history, our laws. We're committed to building a diverse network and supporting BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color-led movements and frontline communities. But it's important to note that justice doesn't mean just that. When we think about systemic racism and oppression, we're also thinking about, yes, making sure people of color, but also those most impacted. So Michigan, for example, has a great environmental justice mapping tool. We find many rural white communities that are very impacted by the transition away from fossil fuels. And we want to make sure that we're also including those fossil fuel workers in our just transition. So climate justice is a big term for me and my work.
As we've been learning in our conversation so far in this podcast series, there's so many different ways we can think about climate justice. Could you provide some more context and examples about how systemic racism is playing out in the climate crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at the climate risks to a state like Michigan, we know that we're getting about 5 more inches of rain per year, and that causes a lot of flooding, right? Because we also have a lot of paved surfaces, and that extra floodwater has nowhere to go. And we have homes in especially Detroit, in Flint. When we think about where does our drinking water come from, that's a whole other story, of course. But when we even think about just the impacts of localized flooding, those are most often occurring in low income, minority, disadvantaged neighborhoods. Those are the folks that are the least equipped to deal with a flood emergency and to be able to handle it, or to have other resources, or even sometimes insurance. There was an example, a story of a woman in Detroit in the last floods of 2021, just last year, who went down to collect on some of the services the city was offering. And they said, well, you got to have the paperwork for your car that supposedly, she's like, the car got washed away. How am I supposed to have the paperwork for that? So we definitely see that. The other big one is health outcomes, of course. We know that communities of low income for sure, but also of color, are disproportionately impacted from the carbon pollution. So all sorts of greenhouse gases, right, are causing the climate crisis, but they're also contributing to poor air quality in localized situations. And we know that residents in those communities are 4 to even 10 times more likely to suffer from asthma and other respiratory diseases, causing all sorts of medical bills, but also time off from work or kids that aren't able to play sports. So those are just a kind of a couple big examples, the flooding impacts and the health impacts.
What do you think influenced your understanding of climate justice?
Yeah, God, it's such a big question, and it's so hard to, I don't have a moment that, like an aha moment that I like pinpointed this understanding. But I will say that really this started, I taught environmental policy and law for almost 15 years at Western Michigan University. And was always teaching about the New Deal, right? Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the kind of classic environmental movement. And we were always critiquing that New Deal and the environmental movement for the lack of equity, right? We all know about FDR, great policies to expand housing and transportation, but that also resulted in redlining and in creating these segregated communities that don't have access to the same resources and property taxes and all those things. The environmental movement was very similar, and is still a very white movement, a very white-led movement that originally was about protecting parks and playscapes for white elitists, frankly, if you really go back to the history. And for a long time, I was teaching this, we were critiquing it, but we had no answer to it. And I guess the aha moment, if I have to pick one, was probably when the Sunrise Movement started, 2017, and they came out with the Green New Deal. And they were the first folks that I had ever seen connect the dots between these economic inequalities and the environmental inequalities and say, we can't do one or the other. And we have an opportunity to correct those historical mistakes, right? It's great that we have cleaner air and water, and it's great that some people got housing, but we have an opportunity now to work equity into those. And I think the Green New Deal, I would have to point to Sunrise Movement and thank them for really opening my eyes to, oh my gosh, we could deal with these all together. They're not separate issues. They are interrelated and frankly interlocked. And that sort of is where I got my understanding of this.
The concept of a Green New Deal has been around since the mid-2000s. In 2019, the U.S. House of Representatives proposed a congressional resolution for a Green New Deal, articulating the need to create solutions that address the climate crisis, economy, and inequalities affecting people in the United States. What would you say are the biggest challenges in the climate justice movement?
Biggest challenges in the climate justice movement. Wow, there are many from where I sit. I think what I was just speaking about with a primarily still white-led environmental movement, and myself included, when we look at the leaders of some of the big environments, big green organizations, they're not diverse. So they're not really representing that diversity of voices. And so we have a huge challenge in incorporating those voices. But moreover, I think the challenge that I hope finally learned is it's not my role to lead on justice. It's my role to be an ally and to be a partner and support the BIPOC communities that are leading on this issue. We want to make sure those are the voices that get heard first and foremost. And I'm there to lift those voices up. And so I think that's been it's a challenge, right? Because we're so used to, in our white supremacy culture, of, oh, this is our response, and getting out that tweet or whatever that reaction is. And what this is really asking folks like me to do is to stop, take a pause, check in with your partners, really think it through from that perspective, let those voices lead. And then it's my job to amplify those and to sort of step back in that role somewhat. And so I think that's been a huge challenge, not just for me, but for lots of the other groups that are out there. And how do we really, climate justice can often be seen as either I'm excluding that, or it can be seen as oppositional. And the last thing that we want to do is continue this bifurcated movement where it's like climate over here and justice over here. Again, we have an opportunity to connect those dots and be more powerful together. But that means some of us white folks need to step back in this movement and let other voices lead.
As you're working with communities and other organizations, what are some of the reactions you're getting when combining climate change to other justice movements?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've sort of centered around this idea of, folks like me who are still climate crisis, right? And the urgency of this moment. What I can do is work within a justice framework. And our colleagues that are the BIPOC-led, that are truly representing the most impacted communities, they can lead with a justice focus but have a climate framework, right? And so we're trying to use that language and sort of merge those two together. So that's kind of how we think about doing the work. Michigan Climate Action Network is very honored to sit at two different Michigan state tables. One is the Michigan Alliance for Justice in Climate. So that's an example of how you lead with justice, but yes, climate, right? Because it's justice first. And even though the climate crisis is urgent, again, if we're not meeting the needs of our most vulnerable, then we're not really fixing the root cause, right? And so they're much more authentic voices to lead that piece. And the other great organization here in the state of Michigan is the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition, which is a fantastic organization doing many of these same things. And so what MyCan does is sit on those tables, follow that lead when we have those opportunities and uplift those voices, as well as educate our own, again, mostly white movement about why justice would be important, right? I get a lot of questions about why are you doing that? Or why aren't you saying this, right? So those are kind of the big things we're trying to do.
Our focus this week is on climate justice and open access. When something's published open access, anyone, anywhere in the world can access it for free online. How do you see open access supporting or contributing to climate justice?
Yeah, well, this question is huge. I think this is absolutely the trend that we need to be going in, right? So right, just so you know, right, in this whole Western scientific, we've got a lot of gains from that process. And it's also, frankly, been quite a violation of many other groups' rights and another steal of knowledge. So when we think about some of the big concepts or even research that we've done, most of the time that's been out interviewing local folks who already knew how to grow food sustainably or keep their water, right? And what Western science has done is just take that, put it into our fancy words and republish it out as our own. And so just so you know, right, where I come from is that's its whole own violation within the equity space. And so for me, it's not just about Western science kind of making that open access. It really should be also going even further and saying, let's give the credit where credit is due here. And there are lots of critiques about the use of indigenous knowledge and how we are translating that, you know, into white scientific language, how we're using that. And that's, of course, why this movement is so important, because if everything, right, in the justice world has been already stolen, right, it's kind of like a reparations in a way to at least have open access to your own information. And so I think I would start there. And there's also, of course, a broader point here about that knowledge that has then been lost. And now sometimes it is only held in this scientific way. And so we really have, I think, then an obligation to make this open access. It makes a huge difference. I cannot tell you how many folks going around the state that I get to visit now still don't have reliable internet access, even, much less the ability to pay for, you know, subscriptions or connections to get to, like we have at Western Michigan University's libraries. So having open access is really critical to folks being able to find that information. If it's already been lost or appropriated from their communities, bring it back into those communities at that, and remove some of those barriers. It reminds me a lot right now, one of the big things that we're working on, of course, we have some federal funding and some laws that were passed to kind of give some money to the climate movement. It's sort of the same thing, like, okay, but where do I have to sign up and how do I apply and how do I write all of that paper or that grant? And then how do I like get it? And so open access is just one of the many small things I think we can do to really make things accessible, right? To open that piece up and make it a lot easier for, again, the folks who need it the most and who we probably took the knowledge from in the first place to be able to get it.
It might be something that many of us have never really considered when thinking about research. Where did it come from? Is it credited appropriately? Do the people who provided the basis of the research have access? Making this research open access seems like the least that could be done in these situations. In your work, do you consciously seek out open access resources?
Absolutely. So one thing that I was mentioning is a Michigan environmental justice screening tool. And that is really thanks to a lot of researchers and the communities themselves, again, actually doing what we were just talking about and saying, no, this is shared knowledge that if used in allyship and partnership can be then shared with everyone. And so that those mapping tools that are created are a really great example of how, researchers and communities and then regular folks, right, and the state can all work together to create really valuable and meaningful resources that are now then available to everyone to be able to utilize for free. So anyone can go on the state of Michigan's site and look this data up and find out where are the vulnerable low income communities, and are we truly then serving those folks, right? So if everyone sort of has this equity charge, and then we have tools like that available to all of us that are shared knowledge, truly shared knowledge that were co-created, then that's an incredibly fruitful way for us to work through and frankly heal some of the harms that are out there and find also then a way to move forward together.
When you're thinking about the climate justice movement, is there anything that gives you hope?
Of course. Oh my gosh. So I think, the why it's a challenge and hard, kind of back to that question. We don't know what it looks like to do this successfully. I think we are in a new zone here where we don't really know, like the language I was giving about climate focus, justice focus, climate framework is all new to all of us. No one knows exactly what that looks like. And I'm putting that in my hope category because what I am seeing are a lot of folks really working on those relationships. I see a lot of white people doing their own work, working on ourselves. I know I've done a lot and have a lot more to go to just even understand what's happening or why you might get the reaction that you get or why you're operating still in a certain way. And so that the future is very unknown about how we do this work together gives us an opportunity to take that step back, build those relationships, learn some new things. And I see that happening. And so that to me is really, really hopeful. I see a huge movement to do equity training across organizations. I mean, the workplace is frankly demanding that we now are trained in these types of processes. And that is just fantastic because you're going to reach so many other folks through their jobs to be able to go through this kind of equity training. And so I often say, we've been working on equity and justice a lot longer than climate in this world, right? But I often use it as an example. What I'd like to see in your organization is a climate statement that is as strong as your equity or your land acknowledgement statement, right? And that people get that reference now. If I'm just out there generally talking to someone, they're like, oh, yeah, we have an equity statement, but we don't have a climate statement. I'm like, there you go. And we could put those things together. So just the amount of those that I see out there, and again, we could say some of those might be greenwashing, but to me, anytime someone is taken the moment to make that recognition, that's taken it way more seriously than we ever have. And I do see folks trying to do that work.
How are you seeing climate justice with students or younger generations playing out? We know in general that they are more active and vocal, but what have you observed?
Yeah, boy, the kids are all right. They are really holding the rest of us, frankly, accountable. Because to them, there isn't this separation. They totally get that we have to be focusing on equity and justice within the climate space, and they see them as interrelated. They've grown up with the concept of climate, so we don't have to argue about all that stuff. And they've been growing up with this concept of equity being normalized. So I think they're really holding us accountable. And you're absolutely right that they are much more active. There is a what we call the politics of protest. And then there's the politics of influence, right? And some of us older folks who know about lobbying and money and campaigns, right? That's sort of influence. And the younger generation is really doing something imaginative, I think, in sort of merging the politics of protest, the actual strike, right? The march, the sit-in. They're merging that protest type of movement with the influence, because they're also willing to donate their time, their money if they have it, their intellect, and their shared knowledge. And they're doing both of those things together. And that's been the most amazing thing, I think, that Gen Z and beyond will continue to contribute to this movement.
We're coming to the end of our conversation. Dr. Keele, any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Well, I would clarify a little bit what I mean by an ally or a partner, as I think it's really important that not just be performative, right? And when I talk about that, what I mean is campaign alignment. Again, the idea of I'm going to wait. I'm going to go and see, what the communities that are actually impacted want, what they're saying about it, and then I need to align my campaign with theirs, with that speak. And so I think that's been a really interesting thing. If you think about environmental justice, there's sort of like recognitional justice, and that would be like a land acknowledgement, which great, right? And there's like procedural, like did I actually am I at this state table with the Michigan Alliance for Justice and Climate? Okay, great. And then there's alignment, right? And that's where I'd say a lot of us are trying to be. And then there's still one step further, which would be reparative, right? So how do I then we have to truly be ready to give up all of our power.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for listening to Talking Open for Climate Justice, a podcast created by Western Michigan University Libraries for International Open Access Week. For more information about open access, visit our website, wmich.edu/library/open-access.